Like many of Nintendo fans, I saw the announcement of Star Fox. Yeah, Nintendo needs to work on their subtitles. Anyway, as I went on to Twitter to watch the furry meltdowns and laugh, I noticed a trend. A lot of people were saying that the Star Fox was a remake of the first game. I assumed they were talking about Star Fox 64 and mocked them as they deserved to be. But no, much to my surprise, a lot of people think that Star Fox 64 is a remake of the Super Nintendo Star Fox. So I mocked them as they deserve to be. Seeing as this is a alarmingly common misconception, I decided I'm going to make a video explaining why Star Fox 64 is not a remake of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. Merriam-Webster's definition of remake is to make anew or in a different form. The definition for remaster is to create a new master of, especially by altering or enhancing the sound quality of an older recording. The definition of reboot is the act or instance of starting something anew or making a fresh start. The definition of reimagine is to imagine again or anew. I'm just laying out some definitions here so we can have some common ground if you disagree with me still after I make this video. So I think one of the best pictures of a remake would be Resident Evil 1.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
We had the classic on the PlayStation 1 that all but invented survival horror for the mainstream audience. And then we have Resident Evil 1 on the GameCube, which was made from the ground up to capture the original feeling of the first game, but to sand off the rough edges and to improve on it. Whenever we refer to a game getting a remaster, I think it's safe to say that it's essentially the game just getting a little bit of a facelift, usually going from like 1080p to 4K, but it doesn't really change the game in any significant way. Some examples of rebooted games would be Doom, Tomb Raider, XCOM. Rebooted video games would be where the developers are intending to create a new starting off point for new players, but still trying to capture somewhat of the world or the feel of the original games, usually highly modernizing them to make them more accessible in their eyes. And usually this is a way to make a game without the confines of continuity. This may be a little bit controversial, but an example of a reimagined game that I would give is the RE2 and 3 remakes, quote-unquote remakes. They're in the titles. But I think they're more reimagining. While they try to capture some of the feeling of the original games, their gameplay mechanics are almost entirely different. Sure, they're survival horror. In the originals, you have this fixed camera, and in the remake, the camera is behind the shoulder. And once you've played both of them, they are two separate games. Going back to my other example, the remake of Resident Evil 1 still feels like Resident Evil 1 because the camera angles are the same. It's hard to describe how different it is, but the fixed camera is actually scarier, and I prefer them to the behind the shoulders. If I would put Resident Evil 1 Remake in the remake category, games like Spider-Man or The Last of Us in the remastered category, and games like Resident Evil 2 and 3 in the reimagined category, what games would I give as an example of the rebooted game? That's actually quite simple. A lot of Nintendo games. Hear me out. Nintendo does not care about lore. It took people pestering them to get them to make the Zelda timeline. But even now, they say that they really don't consider it when they're making their story. Most of the time, whenever you play a Nintendo game, especially of the Mario or Zelda or Kirby variety, you're not locked into some overarching story. You're playing a game that's meant to be like a cartoon episode of Popeye. That's why in some episodes or games, Mario is throwing Bowser into a pit of lava. Then they're playing golf on the weekends or racing karts or going to parties together. And this is what I've always assumed, and I believe correctly so, is what Nintendo did with Super Star Fox and Star Fox 64. One of the common complaints that I agree with that I've seen leveled at this new Star Fox game, that it is Star Fox 64 yet again. When you see people complaining about this, they're talking about Star Fox 64, which some people perceive as a remake of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. Then there is the Star Fox 64 remake for the 3DS. Then there's Star Fox Zero, which is a reimagining of Star Fox 64. And now we're getting Star Fox on the Switch 2, which is a remake of the Star Fox on the 64. This really feels like another Resident Evil 1 remake, to where they upgrade the graphics, they polish some gameplay, but it is meant to feel like you're playing Star Fox 64 again. Now that we've made that as clear as mud, I think that it is time to finally discuss why Star Fox 64 is not a remake of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. The main points that I've seen people argue on why Star Fox 64 is a remake of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. First of all, the gameplay is similar. Then the levels are quote-unquote the same. Some of the bosses are the same, including a boss fight with Andross. And it tells the same story of the Lylat Wars. Going off the idea that the gameplay is the same, it's kind of like saying the gameplay in Mario is the same. Yeah, you're got your basic moves, your jumps, your runs, your fireballs, but that's how you know it's a Mario game. This is why I wholeheartedly reject this point. It's like if it doesn't have laser upgrades, bombs, and
Do a barrel roll.
is it even a Star Fox game? Again, this is why I would consider Star Fox 64 a reboot and not a remake. Star Fox 64 adds a ton of new options to the game. They expounded upon the hidden exits and levels, the secret paths, and in a stroke of genius, you don't set your path at the beginning of the game, you choose as you play the game. It's really clever in Star Fox 64. And the levels in Star Fox Super Nintendo and Star Fox on the 64 share names. In some cases, that's about all they share. Yes, some of the bosses are reused, but the layouts are completely different. And more often than not, you're fighting a completely different boss. Even Andross feels different. You fight a giant floating head, but just look, these are not the same fight. And going back to my Resident Evil 1 example, you can put up side-by-sides and see how the game is a one-for-one-ish remake. They did add a whole new section, but the game is like 90% the same.
Hi, excuse me. 2 seconds here. I'm the one in the car, remember? This story's about me, not him. Okay, you got it? All right, we're gonna move ahead. Sorry to slow you down.
Star Fox 64 does not feel like you are playing Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. You have different moves that you can perform. It handles differently. There's a reticle for aiming. Star Fox 64 was moving the series forward. Now let's talk about the story. I would cede the point that yeah, these games practically tell the same story, but the way they do it is completely different. Star Fox on the Super Nintendo feels more like Star Wars: A New Hope, And Star Fox 64 feels more like Thunderbirds.
Are you gonna listen to that monkey? Can't let you do that, Star Fox. The hatches are open. No! Give the brake! I say, stop it!
I've been waiting for you, Star Fox.
If you ever wondered why they look and move like puppets, now you know why. In Super Star Fox, you will notice that there is banter, but not as much. Usually the communication is precise and direct, and you don't talk to any of the bosses until you get to Andross. But there's a lot more banter and chipper conversation in 64. And there's back and forth with the bosses. To be clear, I do not dislike the back and forth you have with the bosses. In fact, I think it gives them a lot of personality and makes them more memorable. Star Wolf is the GOAT. But I personally prefer the tone of the original. But considering both these games are masterpieces, I'm not complaining either way. So to summarize my thoughts, Star Fox 64 is a reboot of Star Fox on the Super Nintendo. Star Fox 64 3D is a remake of Star Fox 64. Star Fox Zero is a reimagining of Star Fox 64. And Star Fox, quotation marks, is going to be a second remake of Star Fox 64. Anyway, that's going to wrap up today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take the initiative and do a barrel roll.
Cat, what are you doing here?
Is that any way to greet a girl?